Hello, and welcome back to the Raw Code Academy. I'm your host, Raw Code, sometimes known as David Flanagan. Today, we are continuing our exploration of the cloud native landscape and taking a look at a project that wants to make building microservices easier. That project is Dapr, and to guide us through today's journey, I am joined by my friend, Salaboy Mauricio. Hey man, how's it going?
Hey David, how are you doing? Thank you very much for the invite. I've
Yeah.
been wanting to do something like this for a long time, and finally it's happening, 2023, and that's that's I'm super happy. Thank you for
Yeah,
having me.
we're squeezing it in right before the end of the year, which is fantastic. And it's nice
Yeah,
to be able to sit and do this thing with an actual friendly face. So, thank you for taking the time to join me today.
let's do it.
All right. So, for anyone who's not familiar with you, which I think is impossible in our space,
Mhm.
could you please tell us, what you've been up to, what you're doing now, and anything else that you think is interesting?
Yeah, sure. So I've been working with Dapr for a new company that's called Diagrid for a year now. Like my anniversary was like a couple of days ago, and I've been getting into the Dapr community for the last year because I found Dapr kind of like as one of the missing pieces of building applications on top of Kubernetes. I've been working with Kubernetes for like 7 years now, always from that like developer perspective, right? Like just trying to help developers to get their applications up and running, but also connected to each other and like implementing best practices and finding the right tools to do the right things. And I found Dapr kind of like the Dapr project to be significant in that space, right? Like it's very close to developers. It's about APIs to build, better cloud native applications. And yeah, I've been trying to contribute to the project, trying to integrate the project with other projects and other communities in the CNCF landscape and outside CNCF as well. And in that journey, basically, I've been meeting a lot of very interesting folks and learning a lot of interesting lessons. So, whatever I can share about that, it's always good.
Awesome. Amazing. And you didn't mention your book. Do you want to talk about that as well?
I can talk about my book as well. It's a funny thing, right? Like when you write a book, I've started writing my book like 2 years ago, and now it's titled Platform Engineering on Kubernetes, where I basically cover a bunch of open source projects and how do they relate and how do they work together to just build platforms on top of Kubernetes, basically. But because I've been writing it for the last 2 years, the moment that it got printed, I had this feeling of, I don't want to talk about this anymore. But now is the time where I should be talking a lot about it, right? Because it's actually out. So, yeah, the book is all about open source tools for Kubernetes, tools for teams and application delivery teams and for operation people to build platforms that basically help teams to just get software running on top of Kubernetes, going from pipelines, from packaging, from application development tools like Dapr, but also Knative for running and auto scaling, and a bunch of other things that people might find interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing with Kubernetes, right? A lot of the tutorials out there get you to the point where you can control apply and Nginx deployment, and then that's it. But there's so
Yeah.
much more that comes afterwards. And it's good that we have resources now that are starting to fill in the gaps and actually educate people on what they need to know to get them on the right path.
One of the interesting things about the book, and I guess that the main reason why I decided to write it in the first place, was that when you look into the CNCF landscape, right, like there are tons of projects built on top of the Kubernetes APIs, right? But they are all built and designed in different ways for different purposes. So getting them to work together sometimes, and at least 2 years ago, wasn't that easy as it is today. So for me, it was kind of like this whole exercise of making sure that I can create an example that can actually highlight, 20 different projects, and then see how each project is bringing something to the table, and also understanding the gaps that, when you combine two or three projects together, kind of like start popping up and you will need to sort out yourself.
Sweet. Awesome. All right. Let's move on to the topic at hand then, Dapper. Can you
Let's
give
do it.
us the 30 to 60-second pitch? What is Dapper and why should people stay tuned?
Yeah, so Dapr is a CNCF project. It was donated. That's a very good question. When exactly? I don't remember the date, but it's a pretty mature project. Like it was created by Microsoft in 2019, and basically the main purpose of the project is to allow people to have kind of like an application level API that enable teams to interact with infrastructure without knowing where that infrastructure is or what that infrastructure is. The idea here is to provide developers APIs that they can use and enable platform teams to configure how these APIs are implemented in different environments, but at the same time providing kind of like a seamless experience across environments, right? So you can have different environments configured with different infrastructure in completely different ways, in completely different cloud providers, but the application development experience is the same because the APIs remain stable.
Yeah,
In order to get that working on Kubernetes, there are tons of things that needs to happen, and there are tons of components and building blocks that the Dapr project provides, and I guess that we can explore a bit that side as well.
yeah. I mean, just that paragraph that you gave us there. I mean, that's no easy mission, right? Trying to be able to build
It's,
applications in this way, make them as portable as what we would all
Mhm.
really like from our stack. But as you said, we're going to explore Dapr hands on and see where all the components are, how they work together. And what I'm really excited about is just, can we show people a better developer experience for building these type of missions, which are very tricky, right? So
Yeah, you need to add on top of that that because we are focused on APIs, the entire experience is polyglot in a way. The idea that like there is no language dependency coming into the space, right? Like the idea is that from any technology stack that you're using, you should be able to consume these APIs, like by just using like normal, language tools. And I think that's pretty important. And also it makes the mission a little bit more complicated because now you are dealing with tons of different technologies that do things in slightly different ways, and they come with different developer experiences and different developer workflows as well that you need to accommodate.
all right, awesome. Okay, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get started with the hands-on component. Before I do that, I'll just say
Let's
hi to two familiar faces, Gianluca and Marino, saying hi in the chat. So,
Hey,
yeah, nice to see you.
hey, folks.
All right, let's see. I have the correct screen shared, which is always a good start. Here we have the Dapr
Nice.
website. You can find it
Mhm.
at dapr.io. We're going to dive straight into the documentation, and I'm assuming we'll need to install, Dapr itself. I haven't done anything in
Mhm.
advance. Everything that you see here is everything that you will need to do to be able to replicate this at home or work further.
Exactly.
So I'll click on Get Started. We're going to grab the CLI and we'll do Mac.
Yeah. So let me try to explain a little bit like the getting started experience, right? Like you can download the CLI. The CLI will basically help you with some developer workflows initially, just to set up different environments and the tools in different ways depending on what you are trying to achieve. In general, for developing applications, again, I don't think that having the CLI is a requirement, but yes, go ahead, please, and if you can install it, like we can go through the getting started guides.
All right. I just assumed we needed it, but it's good to know that we don't. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm on light mode. Let me. I don't want to blind everyone at home. So
I kinda love the CLI experience in general, but when I think about like going to different developers using different technologies like Node.js or Java or Rust, right? Like completely different tech stacks. Um, I always think that adding a new CLI will introduce something that that developer will need to learn, right? Each CLI will come with kind of like a different workflow, a different set of steps that you need to execute to achieve something specifically. And that, again, will push the developer to stop doing what they are doing and start learning that specific CLI and all the arguments and all the parameters. So I tend to go without the CLI, but you will see that in the getting started guides, most of the exercises or tutorials will use that CLI to bootstrap Dapr itself.
nice. We're in a wonderful position where I decided to try out New Shell, and I don't have any of my paths configured properly whatsoever.
Nice.
But I think we can do.
Would that work? Let's see.
I think so. Yeah.
All right.
Well, I've got. Oh no, it didn't work. Oh, I appended it, but it didn't save it. All right. Okay. So env.path equals.
All right.
Now I've blown away everything else
That's
except.
that's yeah. That's not the best. But you have it there, right? Like you printed it before, so
All right, today is not the day for me to be experimenting with new shells. So,
CSH it is.
what is it? Homebrew? It's not.
I have
Uh,
no idea what homebrew is. Let me check. I can check my.
no, it's okay. Let me. If
You
I
will
do
find it.
opt homebrew bin, yeah, okay. So we want to
There you go.
export. All right, brew better, dapper better, cool.
There you go.
And one of the things I did, this is completely irrelevant, right? But because I was trying to convince myself to switch to the new shell, I had to remove the path of least resistance, which is when it frustrates me, just jump back to Z shell. I nuked
Hmm.
all of my Z shell configuration, so it's super vanilla. Uh, but
Perfect.
we're not going to
That's all
focus
right.
on that. Yeah. All right, so we have the CLI. We didn't particularly need it, but that's all right. And I'm going to now
Hmm.
go back to the documentation where we're going to click on quick starts, and we're going to work through one of these today. And then I think you're going to show us a couple of extra things on top of that afterwards. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah. I think that we can do that, and it's kind of like important to see that what you will see there in the quick starts basically are the Dapr building blocks, something that the Dapr project called building blocks, and each of these building blocks is basically exposing a different set of APIs to do different things. You can see the first one that it's listed there. It's called publish and subscribe, right? That will give you APIs to emit events and consume events. Then you have the service invocation API as well that will now allow you to do more resilient service to service communications and service discovery as well. And the management APIs will give you like a key value store API to store keys and values, just going through an API and not connecting to a database or like a Redis or something like that. And then there are a bunch of others, and I would like to say that workflows is the one that gets me really, really excited. It's something that it has been released like pretty recently, and it's getting better and better. So I'm really keen to see how that evolves in the future.
Oh,
But I
nice.
think that for this and to demonstrate what Dapr is about, I think that we can take a look at the state management APIs. That's probably the simplest to get.
Yeah, I mean, workflows is definitely interesting, right? I'm seeing long-running,
Yeah,
fault-tolerant, stateful applications. This always puts me back to people trying to make temporal easier, which is such a noble mission. We need to make durable execution easier for people to
easier.
host and operate themselves. But I love workflows, but you're right. Let's keep it chill today and come back to that
So
another time.
so so this is the thing, right? Like because these are like components. What's happening with the Dapper project is that you will see that we have a lot of different component APIs, and then something like the workflow API and the workflow functionality basically builds on top of other components, right? Like we are
Nice.
starting to construct more higher level components that are built and relying on lower level things.
All right. Let's start off with state management. I always say on this show, or in fact in live conferences, anywhere that I am, right? If your application doesn't have state, you're not making any money. So let's cover state
There,
management.
And I guess that's a very good point, right? Like if you think about applications, 80% of the applications will be doing kind of like reading data and storing data somewhere else, right? Like they are processing data and then just need to store it somewhere. And I think that this is what the state management API is all about. You can see there in the example in the graph, right? You see that you have your application, in this case, like an order processor, and then you have Dapr in the middle, which is the one providing the APIs. And then you have a backing implementation. In this case, Redis is an example, but there are a bunch of different implementations for the state management APIs.
All right. Nice. Uh, just because I forgot to mention this to you before we went live, if you right
Mhm.
click on the screen where the video is and say show controls, it will allow you to full screen it. Because I know that once I get my terminal and code up, you might want it slightly bigger. It's just so that
Oh, interesting.
I don't know why
So right,
the right click on the video, like where my browser is, and say show controls. No?
I don't see it here. Oh, show all controls. Yes, yes. There
Yeah.
you
So
go.
now you can full screen that,
And now,
which makes
there
actually
you
way more
go.
clear. Because
Then
I know
thank you
there's
very
a
much for that.
scrolly window, and then the minute I show you code, you're going to be like, I have no idea. So, uh,
Yeah. I was getting closer to my screen and thinking, okay, I think that I can read, but yeah, I might need some glasses.
all right. Do you have a preferred language out of these? I'm going to suggest TypeScript or Go, or JavaScript or Go. Which one would you prefer?
Uh, how comfortable are you feeling with Go?
Yeah,
I
I'm
guess
comfortable with Go. Let's go with Go. All right.
let's do it with JavaScript, which is something that I feel very uncomfortable with. So let's do that.
All right. Well, oh, we're cloning it, and it isn't. That's the JavaScript version of it. All right. Okay. Cool. Got it. All right.
Yeah,
Let's clone the quick starts then. So
there you go.
quick starts, and then we're going to cd in to state management JavaScript, so forth.
Hmm.
And then we're just going to do Dapr run. All right. I trust you. Going to the quick starts first. There we go. I don't have any of my things. This is going to be so much fun. All right. So this is interesting, right? Even before I run this command, I ran the ls because I assumed there was going
Hmm.
to be some sort of Dapr file that told it what to do, and there's
Let's
not.
take a look at the let's take a look at the instructions again.
It just says run Dapr
That
run.
perfect? Yeah, go for it.
Nah. Is it just going to...
Just to
Okay. All right. Okay.
yeah, it's there.
No
But it's
dash
asking you for a
f.
file, right? Just do that run. Let's see. Do you have a Docker running?
I do.
Yep, it is there. Interesting.
Do we need to do Dapr init?
Dapr maybe, yeah.
Yeah, we probably skipped a step on the getting started guide, didn't we? Yeah, init Dapr locally. So,
It's yep, perfect.
so that's going to run, I imagine, some sort of
And that's
container.
going to create and that might create the file that you're expecting to have there as well.
Ah. Well, no, because, well, we'll see.
Just do a less. I don't know. I'm not so comfortable with the CLI.
All right, well, we
All
have
right.
something running.
Yep.
Uh,
So just to explain people, right? Like what you're trying to do here, right? What you're trying to do is you're trying to so basically just clone an application, and maybe we can take a look at the application code first.
yep.
Because in order to understand why we are running that Dapr run, I think it's important to see kind of what the application is doing in a way. Mm, there you go.
All right.
Perfect. If you go to like the main function there, right? So you will see that basically what it's doing is, first of all, it's creating a Dapr client, right? That basically means that there is an SDK being imported in some way in JavaScript, right? Because that's like an object from the Dapr library.
Yep.
So basically, if I guess I don't know if you can see the imports somewhere, but yeah, in package.json probably you have that kind of like dependency now, like you're including the Dapr JavaScript SDK. And the first thing that you will do is you are going to create a client, and you can see that the parameters are the host, the port, and then what protocol do you want to use for that SDK, basically. They're like usually the like Dapr exposes the APIs using gRPC and HTTP, and then you can just choose which one to use. But then as soon as you create a client, basically, then you can just start using the Dapr APIs. And in this case, as we mentioned, we are going to be looking into the state management APIs. That's why in line 40, you can see that we are doing client state save, basically, right? Where the state variable there is just a JSON payload. It's just a JSON object, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
So, yep.
so Dapr,
Hmm.
basically, I write my code for my
Yes.
application, and what Dapr does is give me a client with a bunch of integrations, one of them being the state store here. So we have the ability to fetch and save state. And I'm
Hmm.
assuming this works because I saw in the logs here, right? There's a
Yep.
sidecar. So this is putting my application into a container, adding a sidecar, or maybe it's not in a container right now. I'm not even that sure, right? But
Exactly.
we have an application. We've got a Dapr sidecar, something that the Dapr client knows how to speak to, which I'm assuming is just over some sort of loopback or localhost, and it's proxying all the requests to state storage somewhere else. I'm pretty sure in the docs earlier on we saw Redis, so Is that what's happening?
Exactly.
Right.
That's what happening, right? Like, but from your application point of view, you don't have any Redis, dependency, right? And you are not even writing the code to connect to any Redis database or anything, right?
Yeah. So is it fair to say Dapr is a set of abstractions on building applications where you don't have to worry about state, or you don't have to worry about workflows, and whatever else was on that list, right? PubSub.
Em- Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And I think that that's the idea. But again, it's like trying to add this abstraction layer that will enable developers just to code whatever they need to code for their application. And they will let a different team to worry about which components needs to be running for these APIs to have, the right backing implementations and the right configurations and everything else that they need for a production use case.
Now, is what Dapr providing purely an abstraction, or does it go a step further to provide any sort of resiliency, redundancy, retry logic? Like, what is that? What is Dapr doing when I say client save, this client state save?
That's a very good question, and yes, it's doing all that stuff as well, right? Like we are building all best practices and resiliency mechanisms on top of these calls, because again, you have a proxy now between the application and the infrastructure. You can implement all these functionalities because it's the perfect place to do so. So now you have an abstraction to access this in this case, this state store, like that can be Redis, or it can be, whatever cloud provider supported key value store is supported there. Like even you can just swap Redis for Postgres or any other supported implementation. And yeah, and then you have all these other super nice features that come because you have like this proxy in the middle. You have observability, you have resiliency, you have security, a bunch of other things that you will always need to implement, and most of the time is delegated to the application code to do so. And in this case, we are doing it at this proxy level.
Okay. We have a good question from Marino in the chat, who wants to
Oh no.
understand the cross-cutting concerns of a service mesh and Dapr. Like, do we still need a service mesh with Dapr? Can it work with a service mesh, or do you just not need one with Dapr? Like, how do you see them working together or not?
Yeah, so there is definitely some overlapping functionalities, but I do tend to think that Dapper adds these application level concerns and these APIs that usually a service mesh will not add, right? So service mesh and Dapper, I think, in my opinion, are complementary tools that you can definitely use together, and they will be providing different things at different levels. For example, if you think about the observability, right? The service mesh can provide all the networking observability, like the low level stuff, and Dapper can add on top of that all the application level metrics. So, for example, how many keys are you storing per second, right? And all these things. So again, it's complementary. Dapper can do something around like networking observability as well, and for example, MTLS and all that kind of stuff. But if you have a tool that it's dedicated specifically to that, this will complement each other for sure.
Because okay, let's answer one question first as a precursor to my next question, right? And
Yes.
then I see your question, Moz. We'll get over to that in just a second. Say someone watches this today and they're so impressed by Dapper, they're like, okay, I want to start doing this, right? I want to make my life a little bit easier. Now,
Hmm.
they've got, like most organizations, most teams, they've probably got some existing infrastructure. Now, is the Dapper
Yes.
approach that, well, everything should be Dapper and go over the Dapper sidecar? Or can I build one or two services with Dapper and inject it into existing application stacks?
Yes. 100%. Yes. So this is my personal opinion about the Dapper project, right? Like we are providing generic APIs to do different kind of like very specific behaviors. In this case, saving and retrieving, key values. In this case, that basically means that because we have an abstraction here, we are not being able to access some of the provider specific functionalities that some teams might need, right? In my opinion, this abstraction aims to cover, like 80% of the use cases that you will implement with the key value store. But the other 20%, it's very specific to each vendor and maybe kind of one feature that the vendor is providing that it's not being shared with all the other vendors. That basically will put you in a position where all the generic stuff that you can build it using Dapper, and all the very specific provider, like vendor specific feature that you want to use, you can separate it in a different service and then consume that via APIs or via any other interaction mechanisms. That's kind of like how I've seen Dapr being used. Because again, if like an architect is looking into into this stream and saying, well, I know that by using those generic APIs, I will not be able to implement by very, very concrete use case that it requires just to go straight to the Redis APIs. And that's perfectly fine. But if you start using for all the generic stuff that you're building, the Dapr APIs, then for all those developers, they don't actually need to know about those vendor specific features that you need to use. So you can just get newer developers, not that experienced in this case with Redis or with a key value store, just coding applications and building stuff.
Okay, so let's push that a step further. If all of my application is Dapr and I'm using Dapr to communicate with the other services, maybe I don't need a service mesh. Does Dapr allow me to then export OpenTelemetry metrics based on traffic going through all of the sidecars?
You can enable that, yes. Yeah, you can get that as well. But this is not the case if like you need a service mesh or not. I guess that with Dapr, for example, it will be, yeah. So for the observability point of view, then you can ask, okay, what kind of metrics are you getting for the service mesh, and what kind of metrics is being exposed by Dapr, right? What kind of stuff? How deep can you go, and how well integrated it is with the rest of the ecosystem? I
Okay.
would tend to think that companies and projects dedicated to that specific space will do much better than a project that is much more focused on the developer space.
Does Dapr handle service discovery between Dapr to Dapr services, or does that rely on something like a service mesh or Kubernetes API under the hood?
So yeah, so Dapr does service discovery, and it allows, like, it implements resiliency policies across these calls, right? But again, these resiliency policies can be implemented by different mechanisms, and the Dapr sidecar will have some implementations there that you can quickly configure, right? But it's just more focused on the application level concerns, right? Like making sure that, if this service A is calling service B, you can quickly define how many retries do you want to do if something goes wrong, and you can configure that in a declarative way.
Okay, that makes sense.
So there is an overlap. There is definitely an overlap there, and I think that we will be working with Marino to make sure that that overlap it's clear for people, and also that we have some very cool examples on how one thing can complement the other, and how people can actually benefit from having both.
All right, awesome. Thank you. Moz asked a question: does Dapr offer any caching in case with regards to like the state management? So, if I send the same request over and over and over again, is the sidecar going to go, "Hey, you've already sent this," and just like memorize their response?
That's a very good question. I don't like, from the top of my head, I don't think so that that's the case, but I can find out the more detailed answer later on.
All right,
Hey,
awesome.
Carlos.
Hey, Carlos, thanks for joining. Okay, so what we've seen so far, we bring
Hmm.
in the Dapr client, we create a client, we bring in the package, we create a client, and
Yep.
then all of a sudden we can start to call
Hmm.
services abstracted by the client, right? So if we do a client dot state, maybe I don't have the packages installed yet. So let's do let's use button. Okay. So that should, if I restart my server, give me autocomplete. No. Oh, there goes that idea. I just wanted to. Oh no, it does.
See,
Okay.
it does, right?
Yeah.
It looks.
Oh yeah. So and now I've got state safe. So I just don't. I'm not getting autocomplete on the different. Oh no, it's at the top.
I think that
uh,
that's based on the strings that are there, right?
yeah. So we got actor stuff, bindings,
Yeah.
configuration, crypto, health,
Health,
invokers,
upsub.
proxies, pub sub, secrets, sidecar. All right. That is quite a comprehensive set of APIs. So I'm just going to pick
Yeah.
two that I think are interesting, and then maybe we can either take a look at another quick start just to see what's going on there, or we can move on to your demo. But firstly, let's try configuration, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know why it keeps starting at the bottom. So I've got subscribe,
Get.
subscribe queries, and get. So does this mean
Yeah.
I can just say that I want some
Some
passwords are terrible.
configuration
Let's
key.
call it scalar number, right? Which is just some arbitrary string that I
Exactly.
created. Um
Hmm.
ABC. This I now have the ability to do distributed configuration across my Dapr services. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So you can access a configuration, kind of like configuration store,
So are these
and there are like
scoped
some different.
per Dapr service or per global application?
That's a very good question. Yeah, so as part of the Dapr application itself, we have scopes, and that basically give you access to different components by name. So, for example, when you are like doing a client state save, you will see that the first thing is the Dapr state store name, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
So what you can do is you can say, my state store called my state store has a scope for this application or for this list of applications, right? Like, and then only these Dapper applications can access, that component.
All right. So this is the store name. And then it looks like it takes a list. So now I could actually ask for my scalar number
Hmm.
and maybe I'll say my name, some random terrible
Hmm.
thing, right? But we
Exactly.
get a promise. So we're just going to await that. And then I get configuration response.
Exactly.
And from there, I can do
Which will be a
all
key.
right. Okay. So then we get the stuff. Now, there was one other interesting thing there is we can do client configuration and then there was subscribe. So does this allow me to get live updates as those values change into my application?
That's the idea. Yes.
Nice. It's a really cool
Yeah.
feature.
And again, I think that's kind of like interesting from lots of different perspectives, right? Like you're getting functionality that usually you will need as you are like figuring out, right? Like when you look at that feature and you said, okay, that's super interesting because that's something that I will need. And if you need to kind of like implement that and figure out how this configuration store is doing it, then it will take time. Here you have kind of like all the APIs with the most common, functionality already exposed there. So just autocomplete and just figure out what you need and then you just use it.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things in Kubernetes. It's been a pain in the ass from day one, right? Is where the
Yeah.
config map changes and you have to find a way to rotate that
Hmm.
pod. We've done it in the
Exactly.
past via terrible annotations with hashes. We're making
Hmm.
config maps immutable and forcing deployments that way. But really, our config could just be delivered at runtime through some system like that. And I love that the API is just right there for you to use, even with the subscribe, which is such a nice touch. So,
Exactly, because think about this. Now you have this proxy that usually, like when you start using Dapper, you will think that it's just a like unidirectional, right? Like you're going to infrastructure and sending requests to infrastructure. But because this proxy is like it's long running and it's running right beside your application, can also call back the application whenever it's needed. So for that subscribe mechanism, basically you will just get the notification back into the application when something changes. The same with PubSub, right? Like with PubSub, you are interested in receiving events whenever they happen in Kafka or in RabbitMQ or whatever, and you want to make sure that the application gets called back whenever a new event happens.
mm. I think you've led yourself into a very tough question there because you put an idea in my head, and that's never a good thing.
Oh no.
I am a huge fan of Kafka-esque APIs, that style of topic-based pub sub, right? Especially Red Panda. That's an amazing project, right? But there's a
Yeah.
challenge, right? And the challenge is that we usually need some sort of two-phase thing. We save something to a database, we grab our pub sub, we publish the thing.
Yeah.
This is a transaction, even though we don't treat it as a transaction. Now, I'm
Oh
hoping you're going to
yes.
tell me I can do start transaction and then wrap these two things. Is that something that Dapper is going to solve for me, or would I still need to handle that on a case by case
It's it's
basis?
it's much better than that, my friend. I'm glad that you asked that. So there is a way to configure the state store to actually implement the outbox pattern, which is what you're describing. You want in the
Yeah, yeah,
same
yeah.
transaction to store a state and then emit a message with that state, with the payload, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there is a way to automatically enable that for the state store for the save, right? So when you do save, you know that depending on the configuration of that, an event can be emitted in the same transaction as well. And that's not there. It's not
Ah,
in the APIs. It's more like a configuration
oh,
space, and you can you
okay.
can take a look into the website.
Okay, so let's go back to the docs then,
But
because that's really interesting, right? Because this is just something that's
yeah,
always been super hard, right? Um,
exactly. And again, this is kind of going back to what I mentioned before, right? Like we are building more complex functionality based on the building blocks, right? Like we can store state and we can emit events, Now we can bundle them in the same transaction if we want to.
All right. So where should I be looking?
I think that now, like basically, it will ask you to run that like Dapr run, right? What are you looking for?
That configuration
Next.
thing you were talking about.
Oh, so we need to take a look for the like outbox pattern. So if you search in the documentations, outbox,
Ah.
there you go. And I think that that's the configuration out there, right? Like that's basically the YAML file that you're looking into is how do you configure the backing implementations, right?
Ah,
So
right. Okay.
in this case, you're using a state store that is MySQL, right? So in this case, you're storing these key value objects into MySQL. You have like the connection string, of course, to the instance of the database, and then down there, like the next metadata that you have there is outbox publish pubsub, right? Like that basically means every time that you do a save state, you're going to be creating a message into that pubsub and the topic that basically you are defining there.
Yep. That's nice. I was not expecting you to tell me it was that easy, but I'm very happy that it is that easy.
And I think that this is what makes the project really powerful in a sense that if you start building more and more complex patterns like this one, right? Because these are the difficult challenges that developers needs to solve. And if you summarize all these things into some APIs and some configurations, then actually you can have like, less experienced developers building very complex functionality.
Sweet. All right, let's get back on track. So
Yeah.
that was cool. I'm just worried it's a bit niche and it's only me that really cares, but I really love that bit of functionality. So we're taking a look at state management. I'm just going to see if there's anything that
Mhm.
we didn't take a look at that it's going to cover. So run it, see it save stuff, and now, okay, so now we're getting the ability to add a YAML file for multi-app,
But
multi-app runtime.
that's. I don't think that you need that right now. Let me see. Yep, yeah, you do need that, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, that's you need that because that's the file. Yeah, that's the file that you need to use to basically run the order processor, which is the application that you clone.
All right. So I probably don't want us to save any of those changes, and the file name that we need is dapr.yaml. Always YAML.
Always YAML.
Always YAML. And I'm going to use bun. There we go.
And then you have the other file, which is the one that we were looking at before, right? Like this is the state store definition using Redis. This YAML file, this one specifically, is the one that basically a platform engineering team needs to define and configure, right? Based on the like available infrastructure that they have.
Okay. So state store we have, and now
You did
so
that already, right? Yeah.
yeah.
You did that, yeah. What is that? Yeah, now you need to run the app, I guess. You should be able to run the app and oh, there you go. Yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
Just to recap, right? Like you are not running in Kubernetes. In this case, you are starting Dapr outside of Kubernetes. And the Dapr CLI, it's basically configuring Dapr to have like an instance of Redis, I think, locally running with Docker and connecting to that one. You need to do, I think that you need to do the other command. Yeah. Not that. I think that you need the long one.
This one,
That
right?
one.
Okay.
Dapr run.
But haven't I just
Yeah.
described all this
Mm,
stuff? Oh no, that's order processor. Okay, right. Okay, gotcha. Because
exactly.
we're
Yeah.
in state management, so that's a separate application
Mhm.
altogether. Oh
All right. What can we see there? Did you change something in the app?
no, that's the order processor. I have not touched the order processor. Oh
Yeah.
no, I think it wants me to be in a different directory. Yeah. Okay. This is it actually wants me to go into that application. That's the
Into the
problem.
other processor. Yeah.
Okay, so I've been scrolling too
That's fine.
fast, right? So we set up the
That's all
environment.
right.
We did Dapper run. We seen this one run. I think we're happy that that one just worked, right? So let's do it again.
Uh-huh.
And my Dapper logs
The other
will
one.
appear here. Easy.
Hmm.
So no, I don't think we ever got logs from it.
No, because that's not running the application. That's only starting the Dapr APIs, right? Like, and your application is not running. That's why the other Dapr run, it's basically running the Dapr sidecar that you're running there, plus the application at the end. You can see that there is an npm start at the end,
All
not in
right.
that command.
Okay. Okay. So I can now do bun run
Hmm.
Dapper start.
That's that's your path again. Yeah.
I hate myself so much right now. Uh, Homebrew bin.
You know,
Uh,
I really don't care because I know that you know how to fix it. If I needed to fix this live, I would be struggling.
Oh, okay. So there's a start, the start Dapper. We've already done the start Dapper, so I'm just going to start.
Yeah.
Waiting for a sidecar, which should still be running.
Yeah, but are you trying to start it? It's like it's a start up. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Just a start. I'm waiting for a sidecar. Okay. That might be because, so if you do like, for example, if you do, oh, okay. So that was like up and
It
running,
says
updating
HTTP is not
metadata.
supported.
Uh-huh.
Is this
Interesting.
is this just because I'm being an absolute pain in the ass and using bun? Am I just
I don't think so.
am I breaking your demo?
Maybe. But that's what demos are for, right?
I know it does the same with npm.
It says that HTTP is not supported, deprecation warning. Uh, yeah, so maybe you just found a bug or something because I guess that the Java SDK is trying to use HTTP for some reason. So if you look at the source code into the application, remember
Yeah,
that there is kind of like a
yeah. The
protocol being defined on top, right?
the thing was here. So shall we switch it to gRPC?
Just switch it to gRPC, yeah.
I'm just going
It's
to cheat.
checking for like an environment variable, right? Yeah,
Yeah, I'm just going to cheat. So
to gRPC straight away. Uh-huh.
failed
Same.
configuration store is not configured.
Yeah, that's because like if you take a look at the command in the documentation, you need to use that like the Dapr YAML file that you're not pointing to start Dapr.
All right.
Are
So,
you running Dapr in a different way or not?
oh
Like,
no,
do you
it's
have
just,
it in a different
there,
terminal?
there's a bug in your docs because it says not your
Yeah,
docs, you know what I mean, but it says run
yeah, yeah.
Dapper run dash F, but that's not enough. It seems to be
That's not enough. And I think that the documentation is building. We are not reading all the lines, so I guess that the real command that we need to run is down the end. So if you check at the last command in the docs, I think that the documentation is building just to make sure that you run different things. That one, because that one is like pointing to the resource paths resources.
I know, but we
And I
did
think
define
that,
that in a dapper.yaml. So I feel like we shouldn't have to do that again.
yeah, yeah, that's true. Let me see. Okay, let's take a look at the Dapr.yaml file.
All
I
right.
would just want to make sure that we are pointing to the right state store YAML file, right? Like that's what we should check.
All right. So does our
Yeah, so
resources
is that, yeah, exactly. We need to check that that is pointing to the right place, right? It doesn't look like there is any resources there, right?
3?
Oh, there
Right.
you
Okay.
go. Oh, okay. So that's the value there.
And this is actually our state.
Uh, that's the app ID. So the concept of application ID, it's basically giving like the application an identity, right? Like in
Okay.
this case, we have an application that's called order processor. And this is kind of going back to the thing that you asked before, the idea of having scopes.
Okay. Hey, oh no,
There you. Oh, what do you see? What is that?
failed
Configuration stores
precondition.
is it says configuration store. Is that can you save your source code? Are you still using the configuration APIs?
Yes.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah. David strikes
There you
again.
go. There you go. Well, that was not an easy thing to see, but yeah, we need to read the error messages. There you
You just shouldn't trust me to do demos. That's what it is.
go. No,
Good
no, I
question.
loved it. I loved it.
Good question for Moz. Do we not need Redis? Where's Redis? Like, what's happening here?
Yes. Yeah, what's happening? It's like remember that you run kind of like Dapr init.
Hmm.
So if you stop that, stop that and do Docker PS, yeah, you see that there is a Redis there, right? And basically, what the Dapr CLI is doing is just when you do Dapr init, basically it will create a bunch of things out of the box. And an interesting thing about Redis is that Redis provides you kind of like an implementation for the state management APIs, but also for PubSub. So you can actually use, Redis to kind of like move events around different applications. And that's the main reason why like we wanted to do kind of like a very quick, easy experience for people to not even worry about Redis and start using, the APIs straight away.
How much of this is swappable? Say I don't want to use Redis. I want to use CouchDB or MongoDB, Postgres. Like, is that something Dapper supports, or is it very opinionated on what the backend services are provided by?
No, no, no. Like quite the opposite. We're just trying to support as many as we can. So if you go to the docs, I think that if you go to the website, you will see that there should be kind of like the reference section, I think.
Hmm.
And then if you look for component reference, state stores, there you go.
Oh,
You have like the
wow.
link, yeah, of what it's supported. So you have
Nice.
stuff that is self-hosted and also like cloud provider specific stuff, right?
I mean, I'm a Postgres person. I'll be just
Yeah,
I would use Postgres for everything. So
there you
that's
go.
very
And
nice.
it makes total sense. But if you scroll down, you will see that you can swap Postgres for any cloud provider supported,
Oh,
thing,
yeah,
Cloudflare
I like what
workers.
Cloudflare are doing, so that's pretty cool too.
Hmm. Yep.
Sweet.
So that's the idea. And remember, right? Like the whole point of this thing that we're trying to show here is that developers can use these tools to build the functionality, right? And they can trust that the APIs will behave the same in kind of like in a more serious environment that maybe running in Kubernetes or maybe running in a cloud provider, because the APIs will remain the same, but the configuration on how the components are wired and how the infrastructure is configured, it's it's the responsibility of a different team.
This is cool. Good flexibility on the secret stores too. So
Mhm.
I'm just going to look at everything. I'm just so curious. So,
Yeah. So
Redis
for example,
logs.
yeah, because like that's another thing that people will need, like distributed logs, right? Just need like a way to say, okay, I want to have a distributed log implementation. You can do that with that.
Nice. Very cool. All right. I could explore this for hours, but I'm going to try not to do
But
that.
we got it working, right? I think that's kind of like important. Like at least the getting started experience.
Yeah, we did. So, I always like to do little recaps, but
Hmm.
the Dapper promise here is pick your language, of which there was a few supported, right? So you've got the ability to do Python, JavaScript. I'll assume TypeScript is just supported by default.
Hmm.
Any of the .NET languages, I'm assuming,
Yep.
Java and Go. Like, what is the other plans to add more languages, like Rust, for instance?
Yeah, yeah. So there is a Rust SDK as well, but yeah, it's kind of like community supported. It really depends on how much community do we get, and if we can get like someone to help us to create the SDK. There were some conversations about creating some Swift also, like Apple
Oh,
Swift
nice.
SDKs, which makes a lot of sense because when you think about these APIs, I do think a lot about like mobile as well, right? Like you can build an application and just use these APIs to basically do the backend implementations of things. So yeah, there are like more. I think that if you go to GitHub repository, you will find like all the SDKs as well. Let me see if I can quickly check. Yeah, Dapr. Uh, .com Dapr, and I think that you need to search for. So sorry, no, it's like just Dapr, the org. If you go to the org and then search for repositories with
Oh yeah,
SDK in title.
Rust, C++, PHP.
Hmm.
So why are those just aren't on the documentation page because they're community supported at the moment? Is that right?
Yeah, and probably they are a little bit less mature, right? So, or probably we don't have someone, like the Rust one is marked as alpha because again, we probably have a single community member contributing, and most of the other SDKs, they are like different companies helping and providing implementations and tests and making sure that the
Yeah.
SDKs work. So I'm guessing that the ones that are listed there are part of like the main project release process, and that's why they are just listed and documented all over the place.
All right. So again, back to the recap. We have lots of supported languages, potential for more if you're willing to put in the effort to work on an SDK. Once you have the client in your application, you start to consume the
Mhm.
APIs. We've seen state management, there's PubSub, uh, bindings and actors. Let's come back to that in a moment and have a quick conversation. Secrets management config, cool. Workflow and cryptography. So, what are bindings?
Bindings, think about bindings about like interacting with external services, right? Like external APIs. Imagine that you want to call like Stripe APIs. What is that example doing? Interacting with the cron job or something, right?
Let's take a look at the Go code this time. Don't know what the
Yeah, I think that
trigger.
that's just basically executing some
Oh yeah,
external stuff,
cron.
right?
Okay.
Yeah,
So this is a cron to run every 10 seconds.
exactly. But bindings, I think that it's like an API just that enable you to create different connections to different things that are not covered by the other APIs. Right? Imagine that you want to interact with a payment service or something, and you want to use the same, resiliency policies that you're using for all the other APIs. Right? Like this gives you all those mechanisms, but an extension point just to interact with whatever you want.
Hmm. All right. Actors. I'm a big fan of the actor model, so I'm hoping that Dapper is going to make my life a lot easier there too.
Yeah. So these have like a lot of that stuff in there. I'm not the big fan of that either, and I'm not an expert on actors myself. But yeah, that provides you kind of like an actor runtime inside the sidecar itself.
Yeah, .NET's really leading the charge with actor stuff, especially the Orleans project where you have virtual
Exactly.
actors. The idea being
Like,
that every entity within your system, like every user would be a virtual actor and you could send messages to
mhm,
that one specific actor and they'd react to it. It's such a cool pattern. But I haven't
exactly.
seen anything real worldly production except for stuff on top of New Orleans, the stuff on top of Orleans. And I'd love to see other
Mhm.
languages really get there. All right, and then
Yeah,
lastly, we've got workflows, which you kind of spoke about briefly, but this is durable execution. Um,
exactly.
Super exciting things, right? Because we all want more resilient and reliable applications, and I love that Dapper is going to make that easier to.
Yeah, and you can imagine, right? Like workflows needs to store state. Workflows will emit events when they move from different activities, and you want to make sure that, if you're trying to execute something or waiting on something for 5 minutes and it's not happening, then you can emit an event. All those kind of patterns can be built with this functionality.
All right, awesome. Uh,
One thing that I wanted to clarify on the languages, right? Because I think that this is important. As I mentioned at the beginning, right? Like Dapr is exposing HTTP and gRPC endpoints. So if for some reason you are working with a language that it's not currently supported and we don't provide an SDK, you can actually craft the HTTP request or the gRPC requests by hand, and you don't actually need to add any library to your application.
so I could just generate a gRPC client from the proto files and then use it in any language, really.
100%. Yeah.
Oh, you're making me
So
smile. I like it.
yeah, 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 yeah. This is pretty good. The main thing about like the SDKs is that we will try to make things even easier for developers to get started with basic stuff, right? But yeah, like even you can just do actually HTTP, right? Like if you're in a limited device where gRPC is not available or whatever, you can just go HTTP the HTTP way. We'll just send a post request to an URL in localhost, and there you go.
All right. Do you still wish to show us something interesting?
I can try to show something in less than 10 minutes, like pretty much the same thing that you showed, but something that I've been working on that maybe it's maybe worth to discuss a little bit.
Yeah, let's go for it. If you just want to pull it up, and I'll stick your screen on in just a second.
Let's do it.
All right.
Can you see my screen?
Yep, we see your terminal.
Perfect. Let me see if I can find another thing that I wanted to show here. So sorry about that. So yeah, so like a little bit of background on this. Basically, I'm just writing a series of blog posts, and I've started with State Store. The same reason why we started here, because it's kind of like easy to get what it's doing. But the main thing that I'm trying to cover in this blog series, and I'm doing kind of like examples with that, is how do you like the developer experience, right? You just use the like the Dapr CLI, and for that you can actually need to learn about Dapr, the APIs, and what does it means, and how Dapr works, because you're starting some containers locally, and that might be a little bit too complicated for developers that are not even interested in that. They just want to use, if we want to enable developers to use the APIs, we just need to integrate a little bit deeper with their ecosystem. And I've been working kind of with some Dapr and Spring Boot integrations that basically they are aiming for just doing that. So the blog post basically covers kind of like the APIs. And let me show you here. So I have like this is like a Java application using the state store APIs. Same way, same thing, basically that what you saw. Like we are using, client. We have a Dapr client, and as soon as we have a Dapr client, we have like the save state API here, right? Same thing. We need a state store name, and then we will just send a customer object in this case that will be serialized and stored in a key value store somewhere. And again, two different functions, two different methods here in Java, and another one for just reading state, just getting, in this case, customer information into the key value store. Same thing. The only big difference here is that I don't have the Dapr CLI installed, and I do not have anything Dapr related running. But with this kind of like integration between Spring Boot and Dapr, which is basically a dependency that we need to add to our application, that I'm trying to figure out what it is here. So there is just a dependency that you add that basically will bring some configurations using a project that is called test containers to bootstrap all the Dapr related configuration for this Spring Boot application. And what this lets me do is that I can not only start my application and Dapr at the same time, but what I can do now is I can write testing for my application that basically will use that configuration. So when I'm starting my tests, Dapr will be started, configured, and be ready for my application to basically call the APIs. So I have a simple application level test here, which is basically calling my application APIs. But in the background, the test container library and the Dapr integration will bootstrap all the things that Dapr needs for this specific application without the developer basically understanding what Dapr is or how is it configured. The only thing that they need is just what you were doing before, David, which is like just have the IDE just to autocomplete all the operations that you have for different, building blocks that we expose. And just to show that, basically, we use Maven in Java. I don't know how many people is familiar with that, but what I wanted to show here is that I can do something like test run in this case, which basically will allow me to start the application in kind of like some kind of like development mode. And when I run this, if I'm in the right place, I'm not in the right place there. There you go. That's the customer catalog service that I built. When I run this, basically what I will have is my application starting. But as you can see here in the logs, you will see, if I make it a little bit smaller, you will see that when my application starts, it also brings, some Dapr containers into the mix. That basically means that now my application can call these APIs, and I can send requests to these, to these APIs, and just use them. There you go, wrong directory. So in this case, I'm just sending a customer to my, to my HTTP endpoint that is being exposed by the application, and this is using the state store API to store it in Redis or in somewhere. Like from the developer point of view, it doesn't really matter where it's getting stored. The only thing that it matters is that it's actually doing that. And I can actually test that by just sending another request just to get that customer by ID, and there you go. So there you have it. David, we haven't talked about Kubernetes at all. So if we have kind of like 2 minutes, I can show something around that space just for people to understand how it works usually.
Yeah, of course. I'll also say
Yeah.
that in over 200 Rockcode Lives, you're the first person to ever show Java code.
There you go. That's kind of interesting, and I think that there is a reason behind that. I'm a strong believer that at the beginning, kind of like Java took quite a lot of time to get into the Kubernetes land, but now more and more companies that are Java based, that are Java shops, are reaching to this maturity level where they actually want to get their Java workloads up and running. And the main reason why I'm building this integration is because we want to make sure that for these teams, we just make their life easier. We're just not adding crazy new tools and new workflows. They just can keep doing what they're doing, building applications in the same way, and then just running these applications in Kubernetes. So what I did before is just run the application locally. What I will do now, if you don't mind, I will just use Skyne to create a cluster.
Yeah.
Create cluster, right? So that's for people that doesn't know, I guess that they, like just a local Kubernetes cluster, right?
Yep.
Pretty simple stuff. When you use the Dapr CLI, again, we were using Docker to start what we call the Dapr sidecar. That's the sidecar that will be running very close to your application with all the APIs, right? And when you're running in Kubernetes, it's a little bit different. What we do is we install a control plane, a Dapr control plane into your cluster. And that control plane will be looking for all the workloads that are running in the cluster that contain some annotations and only enable those workloads with the Dapr APIs. So let's just do that, I guess. Then let's install Dapr. You install the Dapr control plane using Helm. There are a couple of different alternatives. I think that we have an operator that was created for OpenShift that you can use as well. Or you can use the operator for any other kind of clusters as well. So this is basically installing, a Helm chart that contains all the Dapr control plane components that are looking for Dapr workflows and Dapr workloads, and also connecting the component definitions that we have. So what we just did is that we just created a new namespace, and a couple of components are running inside this. Get pods. Right. So that's the control plane, right? Like there are a bunch of things running in there, and one of those things, the one that I wanted to show, is this this thing that it's called Dapr Sidecar Injector. This is basically that controller that it's looking for workloads with certain annotations. When an annotation is detected, that basically means that we need to go and inject the sidecar to that application. So to run the same service that I was running locally into a Kubernetes cluster, of course, I need to create a container for that Java application. I already did that. And then the other thing that I wanted to do here is one more thing that it's kind of important. It's install Redis, right, in my cluster, because I want to use Redis now for the key value store. So I will just run this helm command to create a new Redis instance. Pretty standard stuff. As we discussed before, David, this can be PostgreSQL. It can be any of those, implementations that were shared there. Whatever you want, you just install one, and then you just need to configure Dapr to understand that this is the thing that you want to use for one of your state store implementations. And you do that by doing something similar that we did before. Let me just refresh that. In this case, I'm saying, I have a new state store called KV store, and it's using Redis as an implementation. That's the URL of the service that it's running inside Kubernetes. And when you install the Helm chart of Redis, it creates a secret that contains the password to connect to that specific instance, right? So I will just apply this state store. And now I have my key value store Dapr component created. And that basically means that whenever I want to use the state store's APIs and I'm referencing this specific state store, I will be using Redis for storing my key values. So I have everything now in my cluster for running my application, and I have Redis running. It's up and running, so that's pretty cool. And the last thing that I need to do, and I think that I can show this in VS Code, is that basically I need to deploy my application, right? So I created a container with the same application that I was running before. I'm configuring, an environment variable with the name of the key value store that I want to use, and then I have a service for the deployment, so I can send request to this application later on. So let's just do that. Does that make sense, David? So far, yeah.
Yeah.
Something that you want to ask, or perfect?
No,
Let's
it
deploy
all makes
that.
sense. Yeah.
Cool. And of course, this probably will need to fetch the container from Docker Hub at some point to the cluster that I just created. And you will see that, yeah, there you go. So we have like the customer service being deployed. And as you can see here, Dapr, the Dapr control plane detected that my application requires Dapr, and that's because I have these annotations here in my deployment, which basically are saying that, yeah, I want to enable Dapr for this application, and then my application identity is customer service in this case, right? So if somebody wants to call like the customer service application, needs to go using that name basically later on. Remember that we saw some like service discovery and service to service invocation functionality.
Yep.
Well, that's the ID of this service now. This is how you can like define that. I guess that if we check now, okay. Uh, the like we are having restarts there. That basically means that I messed up with something somewhere, which is kind of funny because I just tested this and it was working. This should go out tomorrow for a blog post, but let's do this. And if it doesn't work, that's fine. But I just wanted to show it working. Let's see. So the application is running correctly. So I'm guessing that I've configured something wrong with Dapr. Um,
Oh, no,
let me see. Oh, it's running now. Yeah. So basically something not being connected and for some reason restarting. Let's see. Yeah, now it's running. Okay, perfect. Pretty cool. The last thing that I want to do, so now remember, now we were running the application before locally as a developer. Now we basically deploy the same application into a Kubernetes cluster that has the Dapr control plane installed, and it has Redis, and it also has this resource that it's called component here that we call it KV store in this case, right? That's all we need. And then basically when we configure the application to use the state store APIs, we just use that a string to make reference to that specific key value store. That basically means that you can have tons of different key value stores and then just make reference to each of them using kind of just the string. And to test this, basically, we can do use port forward, right? Just to access the service. That's my service up and running there, and I can send exactly the same requests that I sent before to the service that's now running on Kubernetes, right? So now this is just running on my cluster. Might take a while. There you go for the first request. But as soon as I send this and I get the 200, that basically means that, of course, that my service worked, but also that the service that it's using the state store APIs is working and this data is stored in Redis. And I can just call the other request, can send another request to get the HTTP, to get the customer by ID. There you go. So we have configured the same application that we were running locally into a Kubernetes cluster with maybe different backend services in this case. Like for the local environment, we didn't even know if we had Redis or something in memory, or maybe even using kind of like Postgres or something different. But for the environment that it's running in Kubernetes, we are using Redis, and the APIs are working kind of like in the same way. Hopefully that makes some sense. I know that I rushed it a bit, but hopefully it kind of like builds up on the things that we were talking before.
No, definitely made sense. It answered a few questions I had. You know, I like that we can deploy multiple versions of the. Let me get us back onto big face mode. I like that we
Yeah.
could deploy a Postgres and a Redis and have multiple keys value stores, and our applications can pick and choose the ones that make sense for the data type that we're storing. And then Dapr just
Mm-hmm.
layers on all of this extra simplicity to build distributed applications, which, you know, again, I said at the start, it's something that we need. These things are hard to build, and more opinionated ways to do things. Although Dapr's opinionated API, but so flexible in the backend that I feel weird even just saying it's opinionated. But you know, it's nice. I think we need more stuff like this. So
Yeah. Yeah, my hope for this is that the APIs becomes more robust over time, right? Like we add more and more functionality that it's being used by people, more people in production, and for building more complex software, right? We have a lot of people using the Dapper project, but we want to hear more about kind of what people wants to do with this. And if you have any questions or any follow-ups, feel free to reach out.
all right, awesome. Well, I'm going to give everyone that's watching the 2-minute warning. If you do have a question and you want to answer, drop it into the comments now, and I'll throw a
Mhm.
question at you while we wait for a minute or two. So you're now working for the company behind Dapr, Diagrid, right?
That's
Um,
correct. Yes.
uh, what can you give us on like a roadmap? Like what are you focusing on a company? What's coming next for Dapper? Is it just languages? Is it maturity? Is it new APIs? Like what does the next 12 months look like if you're if you have that information?
You know that 12 months, it's pretty a long period of time in this industry. So tons of different things can happen. First of all, I'm working for this company that's called Diagrid, and it's not the only company behind the project, right? Like we have a lot of different companies participating. We have a very large community of companies building on top of this, including Microsoft and a bunch of other companies. So there are tons of things been happening in the community. In my specific area, I'm really looking forward to build some integrations cross communities using different projects because I'm interested in in the developer productivity space and developer tools. I think that I will be doing something around open feature, which is feature
Oh,
flagging.
nice. Yeah.
I would love to have like the API just to consume feature flags straight away from the Dapr, SDKs. That's something that I've been looking for a long time. And also because I was working and I'm still working on the Knative project, I want to make sure that you can build very robust functions and try to build that kind of like Lambda experience where you can connect to infrastructure pretty easily from different functions. And for that, I'm just basically collaborating with the Kennedy project, and also there's a Chinese-led project called Open Function as well,
Yeah.
that it's using Dapr and Knative, and just merging a bunch of technologies. That I believe that that's kind of like it's pretty cool to see that they are like just gluing up a bunch of projects together. That it's not easy, but what I see there it's a lot of opportunity to build more complex use cases and to highlight the functionality of all of these projects working together. So yeah, that's kind of like what's coming from the open source side of things. From the company point of view, we announced at KubeCon a new product, basically, which is some kind of like a Dapr as a service kind of thing, right? Like, so you have the APIs in a managed service that you can just interact from your applications without running Kubernetes or Dapr itself. To just interact with some APIs that you create an account, you have the APIs just to start building applications. And I think that that's a pretty powerful thing.
Does
And
that
I'm
open up a? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Please
yeah,
finish.
no, go ahead. I think that's pretty much it.
Well, I really like all of these, you know, very easy to consume functions as a
Hmm.
service serverless platforms. Not so much Lambda, more specifically
Hmm.
what Fermion are doing with Fermion Cloud and WebAssembly, what Cloudflare are doing with workers. Firebase has
Yep.
functions. I guess with a managed service, Dapr, and it's providing state storage and stuff like that. Like my serverless functions can be fully fledged applications and speak to these APIs, and they could be, have much more features in them that would necessarily be difficult or would have been more. I can't speak. Would have been harder or more difficult to do without such a service. Is that something that
Yeah,
you
exactly.
see growing? I guess.
Yeah, 100%, right? Like the idea here is that no matter where your applications are running, they can always access these APIs just to implement things against any infrastructure. So we give you two things in the same way that Dapper is giving you, right? Like we give you the APIs, but also the possibility to configure the backend infrastructure if you want to. If not, we will give you some implementations that are going to be very opinionated to the service itself, right? We will say, we know how to manage this implementation, like this technology, so we will give you these APIs with this backing implementation, and you just focus on using the APIs.
Nice.
And that open up the doors to, like if you're running on Google Cloud Run or Lambdas or whatever, just to know that no matter where you're running, you just can connect to those APIs. And the nice thing is that we are fully compatible with the Dapper project. That basically means that when you create a Dapper client, as we did, you just put like an API token there, and just like the URL, now it's not going to be localhost, it's going to be the remote service. There you go.
Nice. Very, very cool. Well, we have no further questions from the chat. So with that, I'll just say thank you. I think we definitely need to schedule another session in the new year where we try and generate a gRPC client in Rust and do something really cool. But I'll catch up with you about that after the holidays. Any
That
final
sounds
words
really
or
good.
anything you want to share before we say goodbye?
I think that for me, it's really important to tell people that if they are open to contribute, you see that like this project is very polyglot. So no matter what kind of like experience do you have, if you want to contribute with the SDKs or the project itself, feel free to reach out. If you're interested in testing these new APIs that we are building at Diagrid, also we need a lot of people and a lot of eyes looking into these APIs and to the service itself. If you go to diagrid.io, you can just actually get kind of like your like trial account and just give it a try as well. And if you have any feedback, please feel free to reach out. I'm always open and happy to help people.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. With that, I'll say have a wonderful day. I'll hopefully speak to you soon. And to everyone watching, we'll see you later.
Thank you for watching Warcode Live.